In the halls of the Pentagon and the U.S. Treasury, power isn't just measured in aircraft carriers or nuclear warheads. It's measured in the ability to flip a switch and delete a country from the global economy. For decades, economic sanctions have been Washington's clean weapon of choice. No boots on the ground, no body bags, just a digital blockade that starves a regime of cash until it collapses. And in the case of Venezuela, the world's largest oil reserve holder, the U.S. didn't just flip a switch. They tore the whole circuit board out. The goal was clear: oust Nicolas Maduro, secure the Western Hemisphere's energy, and send a message to Beijing. But something went wrong, something that wasn't in the spreadsheets. While the U.S. was busy playing a 20th century game of siege warfare, the 21st century global market was doing what it does best: adapting. Today, we aren't looking at a mission-accomplished moment. We are looking at a masterclass in unintended consequences. We're looking at how a move to crush one dictator ended up funding Iranian drones, securing China's energy future, and shaking the very foundation of the US dollar. Welcome to the Sanctions Backfire. To understand why this backfired, we have to understand the stakes. Venezuela isn't just another South American country. It sits on an estimated 300 billion barrels of oil. To put that in perspective, that's more than Saudi Arabia. For the U.S., Venezuela was supposed to be the safe gas station. It's a 4-day sail to the Gulf Coast. Refineries in Texas, compared to 40 days from the Middle East. Geopolitically, it was the ultimate insurance policy. But when the socialist revolution under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro turned Caracas from a partner into a thorn in Washington's side, the policy shifted from cooperation to decapitation. The strategy of maximum pressure. When the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido as the legitimate leader and slapped maximum pressure sanctions on PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, the logic was simple: cut off the money. The military gets restless. The regime falls. It's a textbook play. But the problem with textbooks is that they are often written by the people who haven't been in the streets lately. The U.S. assumed that by turning off Venezuela, the oil would just stay in the ground. They assumed the world would respect the no-entry sign. They were wrong. While the U.S. State Department was celebrating the isolation of Caracas, halfway across the world, in the Shandong province of China, a group of people were celebrating for a different reason. Meet the Teapot refineries. These are independent, non-state-owned refineries in China. They don't care about the U.S. financial system because they don't do business in New York. They don't use U.S. banks. They don't care about reputational risk. When the U.S. blocked Venezuela from selling oil to the world, it did something the market hated but shadow players loved. It created a massive discount: the $10 billion subsidy. Suddenly, Venezuelan crude, which is heavy and hard to process, was selling for $10, $20, sometimes $30 below the market price. If you were a Chinese refinery, this wasn't a sanctioned product. It was oil on clearance. But there was a catch. The U.S. Navy and Treasury were watching the ports. So how do you move millions of barrels of forbidden oil without getting caught? You build a ghost fleet. Old, rusted tankers, often with expired insurance and hidden ownership, began meeting in the middle of the South China Sea. They would turn off their AIS, automatic identification system, transponders going dark, and pump oil from one ship to another. By the time that oil reached a Chinese port, the paperwork said it came from Malaysia or the United Arab Emirates. The sanctions didn't stop the oil. They just made it cheaper for America's biggest rival, China, and more dangerous for the environment. This is where the backfire becomes a strategic nightmare for the U.S. Venezuela's oil is like molasses, it's thick. To move it through pipes and export it, you need diluents, lighter oils, or chemicals to thin it out. Before sanctions, the U.S. provided these chemicals. When the U.S. cut them off, Venezuela's oil production didn't just slow down. It threatened to freeze entirely. Enter Iran. Iran has been under U.S. sanctions for decades. They are the grandmasters of the shadow economy. They saw an opportunity. Iran began sending their own condensate, the light stuff, to Venezuela. In return, Venezuela gave Iran heavy crude and gold. This wasn't just a trade. It was a sanctions-bust alliance. The Red Sea irony. Think about the irony here. The U.S. tries to crush Maduro. This forces Maduro into the arms of Tehran. Iran gets a new market for its products and a foothold in the Western Hemisphere. With the extra cash and gold from these deals, Iran funds its proxy networks, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and its drone programs. Fast forward to 2024 and 2025. The U.S. Navy is spending billions of dollars in the Red Sea, firing million-dollar missiles at Houthi drones that were partially paid for by the very market vacuum the U.S. created in Venezuela. It is a self-licking ice cream cone of geopolitical failure. For nearly 80 years, the U.S. dollar has been the global reserve currency. It's America's greatest superpower, greater than the F-35 or the aircraft carrier. Why? Because if you want to buy oil, coffee, or microchips anywhere in the world, you usually need dollars. This gives the U.S. Treasury a God view of global trade. But when you use that power to freeze the bank accounts of entire nations like Venezuela, Russia, or Iran, you create a massive incentive for the rest of the world to find an exit. The rise of the anti-dollar alliance. In the case of Venezuela, the U.S. didn't just stop the trade. They seized Venezuela's assets held in Western banks. To the rest of the world, especially the global South, this was a wake-up call. They thought, if Washington can do this to them, they can do it to us. China saw this opening and took it. They began offering yuan for oil swaps. By forcing Venezuela out of the dollar system, the U.S. effectively acted as the chief marketing agent for the Chinese yuan. Today, we see the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, actively building a parallel financial system. Every time a tanker of Venezuelan crude is paid for in yuan or settled in gold, the U.S. loses a bit of its leverage. The sanctions backfire isn't just about oil. It's about the slow erosion of American financial hegemony. We are trading a short-term political win in Caracas for a long-term economic vulnerability at home. Here is the part of the story that politicians in Washington rarely talk about when they discuss sanctions: the refugee crisis. The goal of maximum pressure was to make the economy so miserable that the people would rise up. But history shows that when an economy collapses, people don't always stay and fight. If they can't feed their children, they leave. The Darien Gap connection. Since the peak of the sanctions campaign, over 7 million Venezuelans have fled their country. That is one of the largest displacement crises in the world. While many went to Colombia or Brazil, hundreds of thousands began the perilous journey north toward the United States. This creates a massive domestic political irony. One branch of the U.S. government, State Department, Treasury, is crushing the Venezuelan economy to promote democracy, while another branch, Homeland Security, is struggling to manage the record-breaking surge of Venezuelan migrants at the Texas border. The U.S. taxpayer is effectively paying twice, paying for the enforcement of sanctions that destabilize the region, paying for the border security and social services required to handle the resulting migration. It's a policy loop that feeds itself, and the human cost, the lives lost in the Darien Gap, is the hidden price tag of economic warfare. If the goal was to remove Maduro, why is he still there? In 2024 and 2025, we saw the culmination of this strategy. The U.S. backed opposition leaders, supported uprisings, and even placed a multi-million-dollar bounty on Maduro's head. Yet he remains in the Miraflores Palace, the dictator's survival guide. Sanctions often have a rally-around-the-flag effect. When an outside power tries to starve a nation, the regime uses it as propaganda. Maduro successfully blamed every power outage, every food shortage, and every hospital failure on U.S. imperialism. Furthermore, the shadow economy we discussed earlier, the deals with Iran and China, provided just enough black market cash to keep the Venezuelan military loyal. In a sanctioned economy, the person who controls the remaining crumbs of wealth has more power, not less. So where does this leave us? As we move through 2026, the world is more divided than ever. The Venezuela experiment has proven that in a globalized world, you cannot truly isolate a country, you can only push it into the arms of your rivals. Lessons for the future. The U.S. is now at a crossroads. Does it continue the maximum pressure model, or does it move towards strategic engagement? We are seeing a shift. The U.S. has started granting special licenses to companies, like Chevron, to operate in Venezuela. Again, why? Because Washington realized that if American companies aren't producing that oil, Chinese or Russian companies will. The lesson of the last few years is simple. Geography matters, but markets matter more. You can change the laws in Washington, but you cannot change the laws of supply and demand. By trying to control the world's oil, the U.S. might have accidentally accelerated the end of the era, where it called all the shots. Now you might be asking yourself, if the world is moving toward green energy, why are we still fighting over Venezuela's sludgy heavy oil? It's a fair question, but here is the twist that mainstream news often misses. In our rush to build a green future, we've accidentally made ourselves more dependent on the very countries we're trying to sanction. 1. The heavy oil paradox. Green energy like electric vehicles, EVs, and solar panels doesn't just appear out of thin air. Building them requires massive amounts of industrial energy. Most of the world's major refineries, especially along the U.S. Gulf Coast, were specifically engineered to process heavy crude from places like Venezuela. When we block Venezuelan oil, those refineries have to scramble for more expensive alternatives. This drives up the cost of plastics, steel, and transportation, the very things needed to build a green grid. By trying to starve a petro-dictator, we accidentally added a sanctions tax to the American green transition. 2. The battle for future metals. But the real story isn't just about oil. It's about what lies beneath the oil fields. Venezuela sits on a literal gold mine of critical minerals, the building blocks of the 21st century, nickel and copper, essential for EV batteries and electric grids. Coltan, a rare mineral used in your smartphone and advanced military guidance systems. When the U.S. tightened the noose on Venezuela, it didn't just stop the oil. It locked American companies out of these strategic mines. And who stepped into the vacuum? China? While Washington was focused on 20th century fossil fuels, Beijing was signing contracts for 21st century minerals. By 2026, Chinese firms have secured a dominant position in the Orinoco mining arc in a desperate move to stay afloat under U.S. pressure. The Venezuelan regime effectively handed the keys to the battery revolution to America's biggest global rival. We didn't just lose a gas station, we might have lost the supply chain for the future. As we stand here in 2026, the reality is clear. Economic sanctions are a 20th century tool, being used in a 21st century world. The Venezuela experiment has shown that in a globalized economy, you can't truly isolate a nation. You can only push it into the arms of someone else. Washington's maximum pressure strategy achieved the tactical goal of capturing Maduro, but at what cost? Adversaries like Iran and China are now more integrated into the Western Hemisphere than ever before. The U.S. dollar is facing its first real challenge, as shadow markets move toward the Yuan and Gold. A migration crisis is putting unprecedented pressure on American cities and taxpayers. And the green energy race has seen China pull even further ahead by securing Venezuela's mineral wealth. Geopolitics isn't a game of checkers. It's a game of three-dimensional chess. Every move has a ripple effect. The sanctions backfire is a reminder that while the U.S. still has the power to break things, it no longer has the unilateral power to fix them. If you found this deep dive insightful, do us a favor, hit that like button. It helps the algorithm share this research with more people. And we want to hear from you. Do you think the U.S. should keep the pressure on? Or is it time to change the playbook to secure our own energy future? Let's get a conversation going in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more geopolitical breakdowns that the mainstream media won't tell you. I'm Marco Warning, and thanks for watching.